Inside, the air smelled of expensive polish and flowers bred for beauty instead of scent. Marble floors stretched endlessly, portraits lined the walls, grim ancestors staring down as if measuring every guest. The drawing room glittered. Women in gowns that shimmered like poured jewels clustered together in pairs and trios. Their laughter was brittle, sharp as glass. Selma stepped inside, the sound of her heels swallowed by the hush that followed her entrance. "Oh," a blonde woman near the fireplace said, her smile too bright. "How refreshing. Someone not in couture. Did Alaric ask you to come?" A ripple of laughter passed through the cluster. Selma's cheeks warmed, but she kept her voice even. "He did." Another woman, raven-haired and statuesque, tilted her head. "And what do you do exactly?" "I'm a student," Selma replied, "and a courier." The raven-haired woman's brows lifted delicately. How quaint. A third leaned closer, her glass of champagne poised at her lips. "Those eyes," she murmured. "One brown, one green. Exotic. Do you wear lenses, or is that natural?" Selma's fingers curled at her sides. The question wasn't meant as admiration, but as examination. She forced a polite smile. "Natural." The laughter was quiet but sharp, like paper-cutting skin. "Enough," a softer voice said from the edge of the room. An older woman, draped in silver silk, watched the exchange with cool disapproval. "You're all circling like vultures. The girl's here as a guest, same as the rest of you." Selma glanced at her, surprised by the defense. The woman gave her the smallest nod, as if to say, "Stand tall." The room shifted. Alaric entered. He didn't need to command silence. It settled on its own. His suit was cut with precision, his hair a golden halo under the chandeliers, his eyes like ice catching firelight. He crossed the room slowly, greeting no one, his gaze fixed on Selma, as though the others barely existed. "Miss Rayan," he said smoothly, offering her a hand. She took it, her grip steady despite the heat that crawled up her neck. "Ladies," Alaric said, turning to the room, "allow me to introduce Selma. She is not one of you, but that's precisely why she belongs here." A murmur rippled through the group. Selma's heart thudded. Not a contestant, not a contestant. Just an enigma he had planted in their midst. One woman laughed lightly, though it cracked at the edges. "A bold choice, Alaric. Bringing in balance, as you call it." "Balance," he agreed softly, his eyes never leaving Selma. "We can't know the worth of jewels without stone beside them." Selma stiffened. "Stone?" Alaric smiled, smooth but sharp. "Don't bristle. Coal is stone, but under pressure, coal becomes diamond." The women tittered, but his gaze pinned Selma in place. Her voice was cool when she answered. "So I'm here to be pressurized?" "Tested," he corrected. "Tempered. My world doesn't polish diamonds. It grinds them. I want to see who shatters and who shines." Selma's stomach tightened. This is what he sees when he looks at people. Not souls, not lives, assets. Another woman, the raven-haired one, leaned in sweetly. "But if she's already a diamond, why would you keep the rest of us?" Alaric's smile widened, amused at the provocation. "Because families want their daughters married into names like mine. Appearances matter, alliances matter. But diamonds," his gaze slid back to Selma, slow and deliberate, "are rare. You don't discard them." Heat rose to Selma's cheeks. She wanted to walk out, but her body stayed rooted. Later, as the evening pressed on, the comments continued from the women. "Do you even know which fork to use? You must feel very out of place. It's brave of you to stand here at all, really." Selma let their words slide off her skin, though her stomach twisted. She focused on the small kindnesses. The older woman's sharp glance when another insult landed too close. The brunette in emerald, who quietly pulled her aside to whisper, "Don't let them bait you. They're only afraid you'll last longer than they will." It wasn't much, but it was something. By the night's end, Selma's head ached from the weight of performance. She slipped toward the doors, But Alaric was already there, as if he'd been waiting. "You held your ground well," he murmured. She looked up at him, her voice quiet but sharp. "I didn't come here to fall. I came here to watch." His smile deepened, slow and deliberate. "Exactly." The diamond observes, even as the coal crumbles. Selma stepped into the night air, her lungs burning with relief, but his words trailed after her, heavy as the envelope in her bag. Gregory had texted twice and called once before Selma finally told him to come over. She hadn't wanted to be alone after the gathering, not really, though she hadn't admitted that in her message. When he knocked on her apartment door, she almost didn't answer, but then she pulled it open, and the look on his face was enough. "You went," he said simply, stepping inside when she moved back to let him in. Selma dropped his coat over the back of the chair, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I didn't have a choice." Gregory's gaze fell immediately to the table. The envelope was spread open now, its contents arranged in neat, damning rows. He picked up the papers, scanning them again, his mouth tightening with every line. "So you were the balance," Gregory said, his voice thick with disbelief. Selma sank into her chair. "Coal and diamonds, that was his metaphor." Gregory stared. "Coal? Coal that gets crushed until it turns into something valuable." Her voice was bitter. "Apparently that's me." Gregory let the paper fall back onto the table. "And the rest of them?" "Names, families, pretty alliances." He made it sound like a business merger with extra champagne. Gregory barked out a humorless laugh. "Unbelievable. And they went along with it?" "Some," Selma admitted. "Some looked ready to claw my eyes out. A couple..." She trailed off, remembering the brunette in emerald, the older woman in silver. "A couple weren't so bad." Gregory leaned forward, elbows braced on his knees. "Selma, you can't keep going there. It's not safe. He's not safe." Her smile was faint, brittle. "You sound like a horror movie trailer." His eyes narrowed. "You remember what I said. I wasn't joking." Selma sighed, pressing her hands to her face. "Greg, I've tried to find something else. No one wants to work around my schedule. If I quit this, I lose the job. I lose the rent. I lose everything. He knows that. He counted on that." Gregory's throat tightened. He hated how reasonable she sounded. He hated even more how powerless he felt. "Then let me help," he said suddenly. "I'll pick up extra shifts at the hospital. I'll cover some of your bills until you..." "No." Selma dropped her hands, shaking her head. "You already work too much. You're going to burn out." Gregory's jaw clenched. He wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes silenced him. Finally, he reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Then promise me one thing. If he so much as breathes wrong around you, you tell me. You don't hold it in." Selma nodded, though her eyes slid away. "I promise." Gregory didn't believe her. Not really. Elsewhere, high above the city, another set of eyes watched. "Her friend again," Victor said, his tone flat as he stood before the monitors. Alaric leaned back in his chair, ice blue eyes fixed on the grainy black and white image of Selma's apartment door. Gregory had just stepped inside. The timestamp at the corner glowed past midnight. "Late," Alaric murmured. His jaw tightened. "Too late." "He's protective," Victor offered, "but harmless." Alaric's smile didn't reach his eyes. Harmless men don't linger in women's apartments at midnight. He turned away from the screen, but not before the image of Selma closing the door on Gregory burned itself into his mind. The city was a glittering sprawl beneath the glass, but Alaric wasn't watching the skyline. He was watching the replay of Selma's apartment feed, the timestamp glowing 12:47 a.m. Gregory Ward stepping through the door, Selma letting him in. Victor stood behind him, hands clasped neatly. Ward is protective. Studies pre-med. Works long shifts at the hospital to cover tuition. Ordinary background. No notable family ties. No threat. No threat, Alaric repeated softly. His lips curved, but the smile was thin, brittle. And yet, he's there. Always there. Victor hesitated, then added, "They've known each other for a while. No indication of romance. He escorts her home sometimes. Looks after her. Looks after her. Alaric's voice cooled. She doesn't need him. She trusts him, Victor said evenly. Alaric's gaze sharpened. Trust is overrated. People trust until they don't. Loyalty is rarer. She hasn't given him that. Not the way she will give it to me. The monitor flicked off with a gesture. The image vanished, but Selma's tired face lingered in his mind. She held her ground tonight, Alaric said, almost to himself. The others preened, but she endured. Do you know what that means, Victor? That she is resilient, Victor supplied. That she is mine, Alaric corrected softly. Even when she resists, especially when she resists, she proves why it must be her. The next morning, his secretary arrived with her usual precision. She set a stack of papers on his desk, and then laid down a tray of small velvet boxes, each embossed with his family crest. The gifts have been delivered to the others, she reported. Van Holt received her emerald pendant, Laurent her silk gown, De Vere her commission for a portrait. Alaric barely glanced at the list. Baubles for birds. The secretary gestured toward the tray. These were returned from the printers this morning. He lifted one velvet lid. Inside, nestled in cream satin, was not a jewel, but a folded card edged in gilt. His crest stamped the wax seal. Not an invitation, a summons. Alaric's smile deepened. Perfect. Later that evening, Selma returned to her apartment to find a plain brown package by her door. No velvet, no wax seals, no ostentation. Inside were 3 hard-bound volumes. Rare environmental studies she had marked quietly on her Amazon wish list months ago but never purchased. The note was brief, written in a hand she already knew too well. Diamonds don't need polish. They need knowledge. Selma stared at the card for a long time, unease settling like lead in her stomach. He had seen her list. He had been looking. 2 days later, a courier in a dark suit met her at her mailbox with one of the velvet boxes stamped in wax. Inside, a gilt-edged card. Not an invitation, a summons, to spend the weekend at Alaric's estate. A second card held a room assignment, an itinerary, and a line in tiny script that felt like a smile she couldn't see. Your presence is essential to the balance of the weekend. Selma set the box on her kitchen table beside her textbooks, and took a breath that didn't reach the bottom of her lungs. She typed a reply on her old laptop, choosing each word like a step across ice. Mr. Voss, thank you for the invitation. Unfortunately, I must decline due to academic and work obligations. Respectfully, Selma Rayan. She hit send before she could talk herself out of it, then slid the velvet box back into its cardboard sleeve and tucked it into a drawer that didn't quite close. Thursday afternoon at the shelter, the lobby smelled like wet fur and bleach, and Mr. Pickles was conducting a loud protest against the existence of bath time. Selma was halfway through stacking cans when Ms. Calder, the director, hurried in, flushed, whispering, Selma, there's someone here to see you. Please, just come. She led Selma to the front where the glass door framed a slice of winter sun, and Alaric Voss, not in a velvet suit, but in a soft gray coat, his hair a careful disarray that read as approachable in photographs. No entourage. No press. Just a slim leather folio in his hand, and that immaculate, practiced smile. Miss Rayan, he said, as if they'd simply bumped into each other on a quiet street. Apologies for intruding on your afternoon. Selma's fingers tightened around the can she was holding. You're interrupting nothing, she said evenly, and set it down. Alaric glanced past her, taking in the taped-up wish lists, the dented donation bin, the hand-lettered kennel cards. You give a great deal of time here. He opened the folio and drew out a single page on heavy paper. It deserves more time from others. Miss Calder pressed a hand to her throat as she read. This is... oh my... This would cover food, medicine, new runs. Selma, do you see? Her eyes were bright with grateful tears. Alaric continued mildly. A personal contribution. Effective immediately, if you'll accept it. His gaze slid back to Selma. In honor of your dedication. Selma felt the room tilt a fraction. The words were clean. The timing was not. That's generous, she said. Steady because steady was the only option. But you didn't need to bring it yourself. I prefer to place things where they belong, he replied. Besides, I wanted to understand the place that takes so much of your time. He crouched without hesitation when Mr. Pickles patted over, sniffed his shoe, and sneezed. Alaric's smile sharpened. General Pickles, I presume. Mr. Pickles, Selma corrected before she could help it. Of course. He rose. About the weekend. Your note mentioned conflicts. I'd hate for the shelter to miss out on momentum while you juggle schedules. Perhaps we can ease the strain. Selma heard what he didn't say. Perhaps you can stop refusing what I have already decided you will do. She met his eyes. We manage, she said. We always have. His expression softened, all apology and polish. This isn't pressure, Miss Rayan. It's patronage. I admire people who build something from very little. His voice lowered, velvet over steel. Consider the house this weekend. Rooms are prepared. You'll find time. Opens when it needs to. Miss Calder, still blinking at the letter, looked between them, oblivious to the undertow. Selma, this is... I know, Selma said gently, without looking away from Alaric. It's a lot. Alaric closed the folio. Then I won't keep you. He nodded to Miss Calder with perfect courtesy, then to Selma with something that was not courtesy at all. Thank you for what you do here. He left the way he'd come. Quietly, decisively. The bell over the door chimed once, and the shelter felt larger and smaller at the same time. Miss Calder exhaled, half laugh, half sob. Can you believe it? An angel, out of nowhere. Selma stared at the closed door. Out of somewhere, she said, barely above a whisper. Behind her, Mr. Pickles leaned against her shin until she remembered to breathe. Gregory arrived at Selma's apartment late, still in his scrubs, his hair damp from a rushed shower at the hospital. He carried takeout, 2 containers of curry, because he knew she never remembered to eat when she was upset. Selma let him in, her face pale in the dim kitchen light. The velvet box still sat on the counter, shoved under a pile of unopened mail. Gregory set the food down, shrugged off his jacket, and leaned on the table. All right, what happened? Selma pressed her lips together. He showed up. Gregory blinked. Alaric? Where? At the shelter, she said. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. Donation in hand, enough to make everyone look at him like he'd descended from heaven. Gregory swore under his breath. And you? I smiled, she admitted. I smiled because what else was I supposed to do? The director was nearly crying. He made it sound like a gesture of goodwill, like admiration. But the timing? She shook her head. He was making sure I knew refusing wasn't really an option. Gregory's hands curled into fists on the tabletop. He's tightening the net. Yes, Selma said quietly. And he's good at it. Too good. For a long moment they sat in silence, the curry cooling between them. Gregory watched her, the way her eyes shone with exhaustion, the way her shoulders slumped, the way she still held herself together even as the world bent around her. Something in his chest ached. He'd always thought of her as family, as the closest thing to home he had left. But now, watching her struggle against Alaric's weight, he realized it wasn't just protectiveness that drove him. It was more. It had been more for a while. He wanted to tell her that she deserved better, that she deserved someone who saw her as a person, not a prize. But she was already drowning in Alaric's orbit, and the last thing she needed was another complication. So instead, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, steady and firm. We'll find a way out of this, he said. I won't let him corner you. Selma looked down at their joined hands. She didn't pull away. Her throat tightened, but her voice stayed even. I don't know if there is a way out. There is, Gregory said, more fiercely than he meant to. There has to be. And until then, you're not alone in this. Not ever. Selma blinked hard and nodded once, quickly, before her eyes betrayed her. She squeezed his hand back, a small gesture, but one that steadied her heartbeat for the first time all day. Outside, the city hummed as it always did, but inside the tiny apartment, Something had shifted, an unspoken truth that hung between them, too fragile to name, too dangerous to act on. And somewhere, high above in a glass tower, Alaric Voss would not have needed to see their hands on the table to know it was happening. He would have felt it, and it would not have pleased him. By Friday morning, the mansion hummed like a clock being wound too tight. Staff moved silently, but with urgency. Linens pressed, silver polished until it threw light like knives. Flowers brought in by the armful and arranged in tall vases to disguise the scent of stone and old wealth. Victor stood in the great hall, directing butlers as they carried trunks of gowns up the sweeping staircase. The gowns weren't for Selma. She hadn't accepted any of Alaric's gifts. But for the others. Van Holt's emerald dress, Laurent's French silk, De Vere's hand-stitched couture. They would arrive already dressed to compete, but Alaric wanted them drowning in abundance, reminded of what his wealth could smother them with. Alaric descended the staircase slowly, his hand trailing along the banister. He watched the preparations with the faint detachment of a conductor listening to an orchestra tune. Everything had to be perfect. Not for the women, not even for appearances. For her, Selma. She hasn't confirmed her attendance, Victor reminded him quietly. Alaric smiled, that polished smile that never reached his eyes. She will. She's already chosen. Her email said otherwise. Emails are smoke, actions are iron. She accepted the books. She accepted the donation. Even in refusal, she moves closer. He crossed the hall, pausing by the tall mirrors flanking the doors. His reflection was immaculate. Pale hair combed into golden light, suit of midnight wool tailored to perfection, ice blue eyes alive with something just past warmth. He adjusted a cufflink, though it was already straight. Why her? Victor asked finally. Alaric's gaze remained on his reflection. Because she does not bend the way others do. They angle themselves to be seen. She moves as though no one is watching, and yet she draws every eye. He turned slightly, his tone soft but edged with something sharper. She gives when she has nothing. Food to the hungry, time to strays. She is wasteful with compassion, spilling it where it cannot be returned. It's a flaw I find exquisite. Victor's brow furrowed. Exquisite? Alaric nodded once. Power without polish, grace without guidance. She is not formed by wealth, but she carries herself as though she were. Do you know how rare that is? To see a woman who belongs in a ballroom but still kneels in mud to feed a starving animal? She would say she doesn't belong in a ballroom, Victor remarked dryly. Alaric's smile thinned. And yet she does, because I say so. In the ballroom, staff unrolled a crimson carpet across the marble floor. The chandeliers had been lowered for polishing. Each crystal caught the morning sun, scattering it into tiny stars. The air smelled of wax and roses, but underneath, faint and inescapable, was the scent of expectation. By afternoon, the invitations had been confirmed. The women would arrive in chauffeured cars, trunks stacked high, faces powdered for the cameras that weren't there. They weren't contestants in a show, but they carried themselves as if they were. Alaric watched from the balcony as preparations concluded, his gaze fixed not on the doors where they would enter, but on the long stairwell that curved down into the hall. He imagined Selma there. Not in couture, not in emeralds or silk. Just herself, eyes sharp, posture straight, her presence pulling more weight than all the others combined. She thinks she can stand apart, he murmured. But even apart, she anchors the room. That is why it must be her. His hand pressed briefly against the banister, knuckles pale. This weekend, he said, his voice quiet but hard. The game stops being an idea. It becomes her reality. And when it does, she'll understand she was never outside of it. The mansion's gravel drive crunched beneath tires as the first black town car pulled up to the grand entrance. Another followed, and then another, each depositing women in elegant clothing, trunks carried behind them by staff. They emerged as though stepping onto a runway, polished smiles fixed, hair sprayed into perfection. The house had begun to breathe differently. Servants moved briskly, doors opened and shut with quiet precision, voices pitched low but tight with anticipation. And then Selma arrived. Not in silk, not in black glass, but on a bicycle. An old, sturdy thing with a basket that had carried textbooks and groceries more often than not. She pedaled up the long drive, her braid loose over one shoulder, her navy coat tugged close against the wind. The contrast was stark, a lone figure on two wheels, surrounded by polished steel and glossy shoes. One of the women, tall and lacquered in emerald satin, turned to watch with an incredulous sneer. "Oh, my God, you rode that?" Selma braked neatly at the bottom of the steps. She swung one leg over the frame and let the bike settle on its stand. Her expression was cool, unbothered. Then she reached for the small silver bell on the handlebars and rang it once. Ding. Bright, cheerful, utterly out of place in the marble-lined drive. "It's a classic," she said simply, with the faintest lift of her brows. A ripple of muffled laughter passed through some of the staff. Even a chauffeur ducked his head to hide a grin. High above, behind the tall windows of the West Wing, Alaric watched. For a moment he stood still, then the sound broke from him. Low at first, then spilling into laughter, genuine and unrestrained. His hand braced against the glass as though the sight had undone him. Victor, standing at his shoulder, exhaled through his nose, a sound dangerously close to a laugh of his own. When he turned his head, Alaric was still laughing, eyes lit with a glint Victor had never seen before. "She arrived on a bicycle," Alaric said, almost in disbelief, his voice shaking with amusement. "Among chauffeurs and jewels, she rings a bell like it's a coronation." "She doesn't care," Victor said quietly, though his mouth curved despite himself. "And that, sir, is the difference." Alaric's laughter softened into a smile that lingered too long. "No, she cares. She simply refuses to yield, even here." His tone dropped lower, more dangerous. "That's what makes her magnificent." At the base of the stairs, Selma wheeled her bicycle toward the servants who had hesitated, unsure whether to take it. She offered it up with a polite nod. "Careful with her, she's temperamental." The butler, clearly unused to handling anything without a crest, stammered, Yes, miss." Selma turned back to face the women clustered in the drive. Some still sneered, others whispered. One or two even looked faintly amused. But Selma only adjusted her coat and began walking up the marble steps, her stride steady, her head high. Inside the great hall, the air pressed close and heavy with roses and wax polish. The portraits stared down, the chandeliers glittered, and the red carpet stretched like a path she hadn't chosen but couldn't avoid. Selma felt the weight of every eye, but she kept moving. Somewhere above, unseen, Alaric's gaze followed her, not with ridicule, not even with mockery, but with fascination so sharp it bordered on hunger. The dining hall was a cathedral of wealth, a table of dark mahogany stretching the length of the room, light shone in mirrored sconces that doubled every light bulb. The air smelled faintly of roses, polish, and roasted meat. The women had dressed as though for a crowning. Sequins, gemstones, silks in colors that glowed under the chandeliers. Laughter rang too loudly, each voice cutting to be heard above the others. Selma had brought only what she owned, a navy sheath dress softened by a cardigan and a simple sundress with sunflowers. It wasn't couture, but it was neat, out of place among satin and glitter. Yet somehow the table seemed to lean toward her presence, as if to balance itself. The first course was placed before them. For the others, roasted game birds, their skins crisp and glistening, served with sauces the color of wine and fire. Knives pressed down, forks tore into flesh, juices ran across porcelain. Selma's plate was different. Roasted root vegetables, lentils perfumed with spice, a salad dressed with lemon and herbs. Someone in the kitchen had known. She picked up her fork slowly, her gaze sliding along the table as the women carved and laughed, feeding as though competition extended even here. The scrape of knives was sharp, the tearing almost eager. A quiet recognition stirred in her. Not a thought, not judgment, but something sensed. They seemed to just devour, unapologetically, no appreciation. The energy was discordant, jagged, while hers moved gently, deliberately. She took small bites, ate slowly, and the rhythm of her meal stood apart from theirs without her needing to declare it. Alaric noticed. While the others gestured with half-empty glasses and tossed back laughter like weapons, Selma's movements were fluid, her posture straight, her eyes always aware. She thanked the servers with both words and glance, offering the bread basket before taking a piece for herself. She moved through the world as though tuned to currents no one else heard, smoothing edges, leaving spaces unbroken. To him, it wasn't meekness. It was elegance of the rarest kind, unconscious, unpolished, unbought. He understood then what Victor had meant. She is aware. Halfway through the meal, one of the women leaned across, eyes glittering with curiosity. "Your hair," she said suddenly, and before Selma could move, her hand lifted, fingers brushing against the thick black waves. Selma froze, her chair shifting back an inch. The scrape of wood against marble hushed the table. "Don't touch people without asking permission," another woman said sharply from 2 seats down. Her tone was clipped, annoyed more at the breach of etiquette than the offense itself. The woman who had reached for Selma's hair flushed. "I didn't mean anything by it, her texture, it's different. I was only curious." Her voice faltered at the end, and the silence that followed was uncomfortable. One woman beside her nodded faintly, as though she understood, while another looked away, refusing to be drawn in. A few pursed their lips, clearly unimpressed with the excuse but unwilling to speak further. The tension stayed, humming beneath the tablecloth. Selma sat straighter, her fork resting neatly on her plate. She didn't raise her voice. Curiosity doesn't erase boundaries. Her words were quiet, but they carried. The offender's cheeks darkened further. She mumbled something about just trying to compliment, and picked at her bird with sharp, defensive motions. Alaric had watched the entire exchange without interruption. His gaze moved from Selma to the offender, then back. When Selma finished her remark, he inclined his head once, subtle, decisive, a signal to the table that she had been in the right. The ripple of discomfort eased, though it didn't vanish. Conversations resumed in softer tones. Selma lowered her gaze and resumed her meal, each motion dainty, deliberate. Around her, the others returned to tearing, devouring, scraping knives against porcelain. But she was not part of that rhythm. To Alaric, she seemed almost otherworldly in that moment, a creature set among predators but not devoured. A doe among hawks, moving with quiet grace that commanded the air without seizing it. The women continued to devour. Selma simply watched them, observing them like she was supposed to, but also to decide her own moves to protect herself. And Alaric, his lips curved faintly at the edges, thought to himself, "Yes, Victor was right. She knows the current, even when no one else feels it." After dinner, the mansion softened into murmurs and clinking glasses. The women migrated toward the drawing room, their laughter too high, their smiles too sharp. Selma slipped away, down a quiet hall that led to a glass-paned door opening into the night. The garden breathed cool air. Lanterns glowed in the hedges. Fireflies pulsed faintly among roses, and gravel whispered under her shoes. Selma exhaled as she sat on a stone bench, letting the stillness ground her. But she wasn't alone for long. "Do you often abandon dinners?" Alaric's voice, smooth as ever, came from the archway. He leaned there, jacket draped across one shoulder, golden hair catching the light. "Sometimes," she said, cautious but calm. "Crowds aren't always easy." He walked toward her, slow and deliberate, folding his hands behind his back. "And yet," he said softly, "that is precisely why you're here." Selma didn't answer. She only watched as he stopped a few feet away, close enough that his presence pressed, but not close enough to touch. "Tell me," Alaric said at last, "how are they performing?" She blinked. "Performing?" "The others," he clarified. "You were brought in to observe. Tonight was your first true test. Consider this, a progress report." Selma's brows knit. "I didn't realize you expected one so soon." "I expect it when I ask." His voice carried no malice, only certainty, but the weight of it unsettled her. She considered refusing, but his gaze stayed fixed on her, patient and unyielding, until silence became its own trap. She drew in a breath. Laurent projects confidence, but she waits for others to affirm her before she believes it herself. Van Holt chooses her words as though they recoins. Nothing spent unless she gains something in return. De Vere. Selma hesitated, then sighed. She draws blood with compliments, cuts without lifting a knife. Alaric's mouth curved faintly as though pleased. And Klein? Selma glanced down at her hands. She fills silences. She thinks chatter hides the cracks, but all it does is show how afraid she is of them. The words had tumbled out before she could stop them. When she lifted her gaze, Alaric's eyes gleamed like ice catching fire. "You don't describe what they do," he murmured. "You describe what they are." Selma's throat tightened. She sat straighter, forcing a small shrug. "It's not difficult. Anyone paying attention could notice." "No," he said smoothly. "Not anyone. They posture, they perform. But you..." He paused, studying her the way a collector studies a rare find. "You see currents, fractures, the energy beneath the surface, and you name it." Selma shifted on the bench, arms folding loosely across her chest. She had the sensation of being weighed, tested, like a specimen under glass. "That doesn't make it useful." Alaric stepped a fraction closer, the lantern light flickering across his sharp features. "Truth," he said quietly, "is always useful, in the right hands." Her pulse quickened, but she kept her voice even. "You make everything sound like a weapon." His smile deepened, though it carried no warmth. "That's because it is." The lanterns swayed in the evening breeze, their light painting patterns across the gravel path. Selma rose slowly, her chin lifted, though her heart thudded harder than she wanted. "Then maybe you've mistaken me," she said, voice calm but edged. "I didn't come here to sharpen knives." Alaric inclined his head in polite acknowledgement, but his eyes never wavered. "No," he said softly. "But sometimes even gentle hands know where to press." Selma moved past him, back toward the house. She didn't look back, though she could feel his gaze at her back. Not mocking, not careless, but sharp as a drawn blade. The drawing room glittered with too much gold. Velvet chairs in jewel tones framed the fire, and a crystal chandelier dripped light across silver trays of wine and sugared fruit. The women sprawled in their gowns like queens presiding over rival courts, voices pitched in laughter that never quite touched their eyes. Selma hesitated at the threshold, then entered quietly, choosing a seat near the edge of the circle. She folded her hands in her lap and told herself she could pass the evening unnoticed. She was wrong. "Well," said Laurent, her emerald dress catching the firelight as she tilted her glass. "Our courier joins us. How quaint." Selma's lips pressed into the suggestion of a smile. She had learned long ago that silence could sting sharper than words. "Oh, please," Klein said with a too loud laugh. "Don't make her nervous. It's not her fault she came on a bicycle." A ripple of laughter followed, thin, glassy. Before Selma could reply, another voice cut through. "Better a bicycle than a borrowed name and a trust fund." The room shifted. It was Van Holt, reclining like a cat, her gaze slicing toward Klein with surgical precision. The silence that followed was heavier than laughter had been. Klein's cheeks flushed crimson. I didn't..." Selma blinked. She hadn't expected defense, especially not from Van Holt. The energy of the room rippled, currents crossing. Not loyalty, but rivalry. De Vere broke the silence with a purr. Now. Let's not claw at each other over wheels and wallets. Our host will judge us soon enough." Her eyes slid toward Selma, sharp behind their feigned softness. "Though it does make one wonder, why invite competition where none belongs?" Selma's pulse skipped, but before she could answer, a softer voice spoke. "She belongs," said the woman in dusky silk. Evelyn, the quietest of the group. Her tone wasn't fierce, but it carried. "If she's here, it's because he wanted her here. That should be enough." Laurent gave a sharp laugh, almost brittle. "Or because he was bored. You know how men are." "Then let him be bored," Evelyn replied calmly, sipping her wine. "It doesn't change her right to sit among us." Selma caught her eye for a moment, a small, steady kindness that grounded her. Klein rallied, forcing a smile. "Well, at least she eats like a bird. So dainty. Maybe that's his idea of entertainment." Selma lifted her gaze, calm and steady. "Or maybe," she said softly. I eat the way I choose. The words dropped into the circle like a stone in still water. Some of the women smirked, unimpressed. Others looked away, pretending not to have heard. But a few, including Evelyn, and even Van Holt with her calculating eyes, gave the faintest nods, acknowledgement without allegiance. The conversation shifted again, flowing toward gossip about dresses and scandals, but Selma felt the undercurrent thrumming beneath it. It wasn't just about her. It was about all of them. Ambition rubbing raw against insecurity, cruelty disguised as humor, defenses raised like swords. She sipped her wine slowly, keeping her posture composed. She would not devour, nor be devoured. Across the room, Laurent's laugh rang too loudly. Van Holt's smirk cut too deep. Evelyn's quiet presence smoothed more than it should. And in the silence between their words, Selma understood. The women weren't only competing for Alaric. They were circling each other, testing fences, measuring who would break first. She was simply the newest piece on the board, one they hadn't agreed on, and one they couldn't ignore. The evening stretched long. After the drawing room splintered into smaller rivalries, the women retreated in groups to their chambers, their laughter sharp even as their jeweled doors shut. Selma's room sat at the far end of the hall, furnished with the same heavy wealth, gilded mirrors, velvet curtains, a bed carved like a throne. But it felt foreign, suffocating. She slipped into the nightgown she brought. It was simple, a sleeveless, empire-waisted, unadorned. Yet on her, it became something else. The fabric draped in clean lines, catching her curves in a way she never intended. Her shoulders were bare, collarbones gleamed faintly in the moonlight, and the fall of the gown gave her an elegance that felt ancient rather than contrived. She sat at the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to the house breathe. Somewhere below, a door latched. Laughter drifted faint and uneven. She rose, restless, and opened her door. The corridor was quiet except for the residual sounds of the other women's voices. She had gone only a few steps when a shadow moved at the far end. Alaric. He saw her, and for the first time since the garden, his composure cracked by a fraction. His gaze dropped, swift, involuntary, to the bare line of her shoulders, the way the nightgown curved over her form. His jaw flexed once, restrained, before his smile returned like a blade polished smooth. "Miss Rayan," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Restless?" Selma folded her arms, though the gesture did little to cover her. "The house doesn't sleep." "Neither do I." He stepped closer, his stride measured. "Too many rooms, too many voices. Nights are louder than days here." She held his gaze. "Or maybe you only listen at night." His smile sharpened. "Perhaps." He paused, close enough now that the scent of his cologne, smoke and citrus, faint but insistent, touched the air between them. "If I asked you to walk with me, would you?" Selma's pulse quickened, but her voice stayed calm. "At this hour? Barefoot in a nightgown? That sounds less like a walk and more like a mistake." He chuckled, low, though his eyes still lingered at her neckline. "Some mistakes are worth making. Not this one." Her tone was even, but final. For a flicker, something darker crossed his face. Irritation, hunger bridled too tightly. He wanted to be angry, to demand, but another part of him knew better. To play this wrong would be to lose the very tension he craved. He inclined his head instead, as if she had only denied him the last move in a chess opening. "Good night, Miss Rayan," he said, his voice smooth again, though his eyes still burned with restraint. She stepped past him, returning to her door without looking back. But the night wasn't finished. Later, restless again, Selma drifted toward the landing above the great hall. That was when she heard it. Alaric's voice, low and amused, unmistakable. She crept to the shadows of the balustrade. Below, in the half-light, Alaric leaned against a marble column with De Vere draped against him like a dark jewel. He bent close, whispering something she couldn't hear. De Vere laughed, delighted, pressing her hand against his chest. And then Deliberately, unmistakably, Alaric's eyes lifted. He looked directly up at Selma in the shadows. He smiled. Then he kissed Devere, slow and decisive, his hand sliding to her waist as if marking territory. Devere didn't notice the gaze above her. She was too absorbed, too pleased to be chosen. Selma stumbled back, heat rushing to her cheeks. It wasn't jealousy. No, she knew that. It was the cold cruelty of it, the precision. He hadn't gone to Devere because he wanted her. He had gone because Selma had said no. Back in her room, Selma shut the door hard and leaned against it, her breath uneven. Laughter drifted up the stairwell, muffled, satisfied, wrong. She pressed her hands against the quilt until the tremor in them stilled. Alaric had restrained himself once, and then he had punished her for it.